Andy won that one. Don't worry about it. Okay. Oops. Just try it. That's why the guy has a bit too late every week. The guy's always a bit too late every week. The guy before me. Yeah, he might be. Oh, here they come around. Yeah, just a long time ago. Alexa off. Yeah. So where can you, oh, this is a bit hard. It's an interview, is it? That? I guess you can always tell. Yeah. So just if this isn't on and it's not recording, it won't be recorded.
So how do I turn it on?
Testing. Can you hear us okay, guys? Yep. Is it too loud or not loud enough? That's okay? Seems to be okay.
So I just don't turn it off?
Definitely don't turn it off, yeah. So sorry, we're having some technical issues this morning. Well, the thing is, they need to be able to hear you, that's the problem. How's the sound? Can you still hear that? Now it's echoing, yeah? Oh. Hello? I'm a bit worried. It's definitely no place you can plug this in. Okay.
Let's put it down the top. But that's probably not appropriate.
All right. So that's record now. That's recording.
Okay.
And it should pick up most of what you say, but as I say, the problem is I don't know if they can hear it okay.
So do I stop recording during the break?
Definitely don't. Just let it be. Okay. James did that, James Carvey, and he forgot to turn it back on.
I think I did that last year as well. Someone in the audience reminded me, and then I said, everything I just said is on the exam. It's a reward for me.
All right, guys, I'll hand you over to Leanne now. I'll come in the very last week, and talk to you about the exam, okay? So this is awful, isn't it? How's that? Is that better? Let's hope that works okay. So if you stand right about here, you should be okay.
You put little footprints there.
Yeah. All right. So I'll catch you later.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks, David. So my name's Leanne Hydes. I'm a professor in clinical psychology, and my main area of expertise is drug and alcohol research and clinical trials in young people. So I've been at UQ since early 2017, when UQ developed a partnership with a service called Lives Live Well, which is a big drug and alcohol service all over Queensland. It's the second largest service in Australia. And so we've got a really good research partnership with them. So we do a lot of trials with them in their actual services and work very close with them around trying to increase what kind of evidence-based practice they deliver in their services, which keeps us very busy. But that's pretty much what my lecture is on today, is what is evidence-based practice in this space. I'd really like you guys to try and interact with me a little, but if you don't, I'll just pretend that you're thinking in your heads. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about just the rates of alcohol and drug use in Australia and in young people in general, and then give a bit of an overview of what type of treatments are out there and what the evidence base is in this space. So when I'm talking young people, I'm talking 15 to 25-year-olds. This up here is the latest 2016 data on the percentages of people who've used different drugs in the past 12 months. And so you can see that alcohol use is by far still up there. This is 70. So they survey about 42,000 people. So 78% of them had used alcohol in the past year. Tobacco is still the second most commonly used drug, around 15%, but cannabis isn't far behind, around 10%. And then you'll see cocaine is actually the next most common. Ecstasy was up until the last survey, but there's been a big surge of cocaine use in Australia, but they're pretty similar in their rates. And then meth's around 1.4% and heroin's about 0.2%. And the other concern that's come up is prescription medication use. So that's when you're using prescription medication against what you've been prescribed. So you're using more than you should in a day, or mixing things together that you shouldn't, and that's becoming quite commonplace. But when we talk about mental disorders in general, substance use disorders are the second most common mental disorder in Australia. Anxiety is the first most common, and depression is the third most common. Does that surprise you guys at all? I remember when this first came out, and I thought, I would have thought depression was the most common. So a lot of people kind of misunderstand how common anxiety and substance use is in general. But in terms of the leading, yeah?
There's a link between substance use, the lower levels like nicotine, stuff like that, and things like psychosis and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. Yeah.
Is that part of 26%?
No, the psychotic disorders aren't in there. Yeah, these are just anxiety, substance use and depression. They did do a psychosis screen, and I'll talk a little bit about what they found in terms of comorbid disorders a bit later. By far, suicide is still the leading cause of death in young people between 15 and 25 years of age. And the reason that we're interested in intervening in this age group is that 75% of mental illnesses begin before age 25. So we can get them early, we can stop them from becoming chronic, and that critical period when you guys finish school, start uni, there's a really good opportunity there to fall off that developmental trajectory, so then you don't finish school, you don't go to university, you don't get your training, and then you're sort of set up with a chronically, a life of just really poor functioning. It's hard to catch up if you fall off that trajectory. So that's what we're trying to do. Just to make the point here that we have a DSM-5. Do you guys learn about that yet? Yeah, so just to make the point that for substance use there was a bit of a change there. So when we had DSM-4, we still had criteria for abuse. And the problem with that was that legal problems in particular, if you're a drug user, it's pretty, not easy, but you're likely to get into trouble if you're a bit careless or you start dealing or something like that. So that was just kind of a consequence, not a characteristic of substance dependence. So what they've done is they've revised it and gotten rid of abuse, and now they just have dependence, pretty much, criteria, and then 3 of the abuse criteria left still. But you'll see that the original criteria to have a disorder of substance abuse, you only had to meet 1 of them or more. So I think we may have been overdiagnosing it a bit in the past in terms of abuse, but the dependence criteria are a bit stricter. So when we talk about dependence, it's actually more severe, if that makes sense. But DSM-5 doesn't really distinguish between them anymore, so you only have to have 2 of these. But then if you think about it, it's pretty easy to have 2 of those. So it's interesting what's happening in the epidemiological world at the moment in terms of the rates of substance use disorders. It's going to be interesting to see if they really skyrocket. because there's been a massive change here, and a lot of the epidemiological data that we're still referring to this day is based on this old criteria. So we'll see what happens. The only major addition was craving. So craving is like a really strong urge or desire to use a drug. So that was added in as a sign of dependence in DSM-5. There is a question on that in the exam, so look into it. Okay, so I'm just going to go through different rates of smoking and substance use in general across the board, just to tell you the patterns that are happening in Australia. So when we think about smoking, you may have noticed it's reduced a lot. You guys might be a bit too young to know, but I remember when I was in undergrad or in honours, at break time, 3/4 of the lecture hall would go outside and have a cigarette. So now you can't even smoke on campus. So it's been a really big change. It wasn't that long ago, but there's been a massive change, and you can see that the population data reflects that. So it's pretty much halved since 91 and 2016, the numbers of Australians who are smoking daily. But the ones who are still smoking the most are our young people, with about 12% smoking daily between 18 and 24, and young women in particular. But we can see even in adolescence the rates are decreasing, so we're pretty much, it's not quite extinct, but it's getting there. Alcohol has also changed a little bit, but if we look at the data on drinking to get drunk, Australia is known for this culture, and it still exists. So there's an annual survey that's done looking at alcohol use in Australia. So you can see that 4 million Australians, when they drink to get drunk. And you can see that in all ages, it is going down a little bit, but around 40%, every time they drink to get drunk, and particularly young people. But you can still see there's been a bit of a drop there, which is good. And if we look at how we compare internationally, so this is the amount of pure alcohol people consume in litres. So you can see Australia is that colour. So we're consuming between 11 and 12.5 litres of pure alcohol each year. And you can see that it's actually not that common. We do drink a fair bit compared to the rest of the world. So we're still up there. I'm going to turn my phone off. The other thing to say about alcohol is that there are some indicators that the rates are going down in young people. Young people are starting to drink later, and that even in university students there's been some drops in the amount that people are drinking. So there are some changes happening in the tobacco space and in the alcohol space. In terms of cannabis, it's been really interesting what's happened in the last 10 years or so. So this is a graph showing the rates of past year cannabis use in different countries, so United States, European Union and Australia. And you'll see that Australia, we were really the heaviest cannabis users in the world for quite a really long time, particularly around 1999. But then the United States has had this surge in cannabis use since probably around year 2000, and it's just continued to go up since then, and it's now actually higher than Australia. Any ideas why that might be? Yeah? I think he was popular back here, wasn't he? So I don't think we can give him credit for now, can we? He's a bit old school. Any other ideas apart from Snoop Dogg? Yep. Yeah. So something like 30 states in the US have decriminalised cannabis use, legalised it, or allowed medicinal cannabis use. And if you look within those states, there's a huge surge in cannabis use. And a lot of that's about just the messaging around the acceptability and the safety of it, and the whole campaign to make it sound like medicine. So that's kind of happening in Australia, but it's sort of struggling, and a lot of people are fighting it, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, these are not the leaders in the daily cannabis use anymore in the world. And if we look at young people, there are decreases. So amongst 18, so I should say young people between 15 to 25 are the biggest cannabis users in Australia. But then if we look within each age group in this time frame, we can actually see reductions from the late 90s up until now. It's kind of stabilised probably since about 2007. It's still pretty high, so still around 30% in the older age groups, and around 20, that's just less than 20% in adolescents. So they're still the biggest cannabis smokers in our population, but there's even a bit of a trend down there as well. So yeah, so 18 to 25-year-olds, 25% have used cannabis in the past year. It's been going down. And I guess the issue with using cannabis is that it does increase your risk of developing dependence. So 1 out of every 11 people who've ever used it will develop dependence. People who begin in adolescence are much more likely to develop dependence, so it's 1 in 6. And if people who smoke cannabis daily, between 25 and 50% of them will eventually develop cannabis dependence. And the issue with that is that cannabis has been strongly linked to mental health problems. So if we look at the data across the board, if you've used cannabis, you're 3 to 4 times more likely to develop an alcohol or other drug disorder. It's also been linked to depression, so you're 1 to 2, like almost double the chance of having depressive symptoms or disorders. And then when we get to the psychosis end, you can see there's a really big surge there. So psychotic experiences are kind of like psychotic symptoms, but not as sort of frequent or distressing as a full-blown psychotic symptom. So it'd be things like hearing someone call your voice every now and again, seeing shadows. I know I always see shadows in my periphery. Little things like that, that is little, what we call psychotic experiences. So if you smoked cannabis, you've got 4 times the chance of having those. And overall, they've done big studies internationally, and this has been replicated probably 10 times now, where they've followed up people from adolescence into early adulthood, which is the peak of onset for psychotic disorders, and found they've nearly got 3 times the chance of developing a psychotic disorder. So there's a really strong causal association there. So I'm going to go into the other drugs now. So this is ecstasy use. So just remember, nationally in our population data, only 2.2% of people had used it in the last year. And that's been a pretty relatively stable rate over the last 10 years or so. But when we look at within ecstasy users, we've seen a big change in how they're using ecstasy. So you'll see back in 2003, most people were taking pills because that was the main way it was distributed. And, you know, and a fair proportion are still taking pills when they have ecstasy. But there's been this huge surge in powder ecstasy, probably, particularly I reckon in the last 12 months. And when we ask people how pure it is, the powder is, they say it's, you know, high purity is 33% in the powder. And if you think about that, it's really easy to mix something in a powder form. And a lot of the ODs we've been having lately at music festivals have been people from having powder ecstasy. So just be careful, because it's easy to mix in stuff. There's also been the emergence of crystal MDMA, which is very strong, so which is why it's got 54% purity. But overall, I think ecstasy use it's remained pretty stable. Just the way that people are taking it has changed, and it's increased the risk. So we've been advocating for pill testing. There was the first pill testing trial at a music festival in Canberra, I think last weekend or the weekend before. So we've got our own Queensland group trying to advocate for that, just so people can know what they're taking and know the risks. And I guess the issue is that there's been a huge surge in the purity of ecstasy in the last 18 months. So in the past, a lot of people would sort of just take 3 pills at once. But now, these days, you just need to be quite careful and actually just try and take one and then see if it has an effect and then take another one, because it's a lot stronger than it used to be. So talking about cocaine, so the cocaine is the one that's really increased in the last 5 years. So about 2.5% of the population have used it in the last year, and that's increased significantly since 2013. And when we look at recent cocaine users nationally, you'll see that that's also increasing. So the EDRS data it's a survey that they do of drug users. So these are people who use methamphetamine, ecstasy and cocaine. And you'll see even amongst that group, the cocaine use rates have gone up. Any ideas what that's related to? Why is there so much cocaine around now? Yeah? Yeah, there's a good supply route now with the Qantas flights from Santiago. Apparently most of it's arriving by airmail, but yeah, it used to be you could only really get cocaine in Sydney and Melbourne, but now it's sort of everywhere and it's pretty available. It's still pretty expensive, so it's still probably about between $250 and $400 a gram, so it's still pretty hard to get your hands on and expensive, and that, I think if it was cheaper, there'd be a real surge in cocaine use. But you see, even amongst the kind of party drug users, not many of them are using it weekly, probably because it's so expensive. Okay, so getting into meth. So meth has got a lot of attention. It's still only 1.4% of the population have used it in the past year, which is only about 1 in 70 people. When we look within methamphetamine users, we see that around 20% are using it weekly or daily, which is concerning, because that's sort of been linked to quite severe mental health problems, particularly psychosis. And what we've seen in the last probably 5 years is a real increase in the amount of ice use, which is the crystal form of meth, and it's a lot more potent. So what the pattern seems to be is that people that were using methamphetamine are not using speed anymore, and they've moved to ice, which is why you see an upsurge in violent episodes and psychotic episodes, and it's in the media because people are reacting to it because it's quite strong. So there's been a lot of work put into trying to target methamphetamine use in the population, but I think in the last 2 years people have realised they actually just need to work with existing drug users and try and reduce ice use there. So getting into opiates, I'm sure you've all heard about the opiate crisis in the United States. So this is a map of mortality rates in the US. So obviously red is more. And a lot of the opiate problem in America is definitely on the East Coast, around New York and New York State. Overall in the US, as it says there's been a 600% increase in the death rate since 1980, which is huge. The death rate has tripled between 2000 and 2015, and every day more than 115 people in the States die from an overdose from heroin, prescription opiates or fentanyl. Now fentanyl is a synthetic opiate that's very strong. It's prescription. They use it a lot for an anaesthetic. It's known for being used to put elephants to sleep. It's very strong. And it's quite risky, the amount of that fentanyl is being used. And there's been a lot of public health warnings around New York about heroin being laced with fentanyl, which has a lot to do with the ODs. And this is just making that point that you can see that most of the drug overdose deaths that have increased since 2015 and 2016 were all in this kind of East Coast region. And no one really knows why that is, but that's just sort of where it's sort of centralised. But it's kind of slowly moving this way. So there's been a lot of work being done over there to try and quell that problem. When we look in Australia, in 2016 we had 1,045 deaths due to an opiate overdose. And the interesting thing there is that 65% of them were due to pharmaceutical opiates. And I think that's the case in the States as well. That's how most movie stars die from opiate overdoses. It's not from heroin, it's usually from prescription opiates. You'll see that 24% are still heroin related, and about 11% was a mixture of the two. So it seems to be that the prescription opiates are what are causing the increase in the States and here in Australia, and so you can see that has gone up in recent years. And compared to meth, there's only 105 in that same time frame, but the highest rate ever of meth deaths. So why do you think what happened in America? Why are people abusing pharmaceutical opioids? Any ideas? So in the late 90s, pharmaceutical companies in the States really did a bit of a job on the medical community where they pretty much convinced them that the prescription opiates use for pain relief was safe and not addictive. There was an ABC expose about it where they said lawyers from the pharmaceutical companies got involved in the people that regulate drugs over there, and it was all a big conspiracy. Who knows what the truth is, but they really convinced the medical community and then really marketed hard that people should prescribe really strong opiates for simple procedures. And as a result, quite a few people developed quite strong opiate addictions. And opiate addiction develops quite rapidly, and the withdrawal is quite awful. So you shake, you sweat, you vomit, takes days. So a lot of the time people will start using and they get addicted, and then they can't stop because then they get sick. So then that's how that addiction cycle begins. So we didn't really have this happen in Australia because our opiate prescriptions have always been quite closely regulated. And that was mainly to stop people doctor shopping, so going to one doctor and getting a script and going to another, because they have to ring up and get authorities for them. So it's quite well monitored. And the latest thing they've done is up-scheduled codeine. That happened. Do you guys know how they took codeine off the shelf in February this year? That was a big effort by the government to prevent something like happened in the States in Australia. And you might recall that I can't remember when it started, but remember when you started having to show your licence to buy codeine? Like they took cold and flu stuff off the shelf, and then they put it back on, but made it so you couldn't make meth out of it, and then you still had to keep showing your licence. So they've been watching it for a while, and there's really good evidence that we were all abusing it. So that's why it's been justified to take off the shelf. So I think we were heading that way. We'll see what happens. My thoughts on it are, well, if you're going to have to go to the doctor to get a script for Nurofen Plus, you're probably going to ask for something a bit stronger after all that effort. So there's also been a lot of work done in the medical community to try and prevent that from happening. Did you have a question? Yeah, but it's a quick fix, so and people think they're good for chronic pain. And to some extent they are part of the process. And they often, one of the lead addiction physicians in Queensland, his wife went into the ED for something and came out with a packet of 90 endone, and he couldn't believe it because it was just a really simple procedure and it was really unnecessary. So it still happens. So we've just got to be a bit cautious about it. But the good thing is that there's a lot of people watching this and trying to prevent it from happening. So I guess when we look at the overall impact of substance use disorders, combined with mental disorders, they are the leading cause of disability-adjusted life years in all pretty much 15 to 39-year-olds. So that means it's having an impact on their daily functioning and their ability to function and make a living and live a quality lifestyle. But then when we look at alcohol and drug disorders alone, we find that it's the leading cause of disability and death in the 15 to 29-year-old age group. So it contributes to between 24 and 32% of total disability and between 19 and 36% of deaths, which is pretty high when you think about it. So it is a massive problem for young people, and this is why we think it's essential to try and intervene early before the disorder develops, to try and prevent this trajectory towards dependence and what comes with it in terms of the consequences. In terms of and so I think if we can try and intervene early, we can prevent some of the adverse consequences. So there's been a lot of studies showing that cannabis in particular has an impact on adolescent brain development. We know that people who drink alcohol have a much higher risk of having an injury, and some of those social and educational outcomes I've already mentioned, but also the legal outcomes in terms of getting in trouble with the police. And there's a really high rates of people with drug use disorders in prison. So we've got to try and do something about it early to stop that trajectory for all those poor outcomes. And it comes at a huge cost. So it costs Australia $23.5 billion every year. And I guess the overall issue is, particularly in young people, even if they are having quite distinct alcohol and drug problems, they just don't seek help because it's sort of seen as quite of socially normative to sort of go out and get drunk. And, you know, we've got plenty of role models for that in adults and our parents. So it's quite normative. And there's also been a big move towards decreases in people's perception of the risk associated with cannabis in particular. The more it becomes seen as a medical treatment, the less likely people are to see it as risky. And there's also a really big stigma associated with going to drug and alcohol treatment. What do you reckon? Would you think people would be more likely to go to mental health treatment or alcohol and drug treatment? Which way do you reckon it'd go? Let's do hands. Who do you think people would be more likely to go to mental health than alcohol and drug? Yeah, I agree. So there's just sort of, you know, people's perception of alcohol and drug treatment is for injecting drug users or homeless alcoholics. That's kind of the perception of what those services are, and they haven't really done much to try and quell that perception. There are some pretty good youth services out there, but I think and the other thing is, like, if you've got a mental health disorder, it's usually pretty unpleasant unless you've got a manic episode of bipolar, then you're on top of the world, so it's all right. But if alcohol and drug problems, I mean, they often start because it's enjoyable and they like it and they're getting something out of it. So it's a long way from, you know, no one wants to be depressed or anxious, but people quite want to be drunk and intoxicated. So it's about making that transition from being a good thing to, oh, this isn't really working very well and it's causing me problems. It's quite a long stretch. And as you can see there's data showing that it's an 18-year gap between when people start going, well, maybe I'm drinking a bit much and it's causing a few problems, to actually getting help, which is a massive gap. That's bigger than it's ever been in mental health. So we've really got to do a lot around stigma around seeking help and what is an alcohol or drug problem and how important it is to get to it early. Kind of like we've done in, you know, cancer and skin cancer in particular, early detection and seeking help early, and a lot of public health campaigns around the importance of keeping your alcohol and drug use under control from an early age. So you can see there that only 7% of males and 80% of the Australian females in our age group will actually seek help, and they've got disorders, so we've got a long way to go. And it's a global problem, so only 1 in 6 people with drug use disorders will access treatment services in a year, and it's predominantly for cannabis. But then we find even amongst people seeking help for cannabis, most of them are polydrug users. And even in Australia, young people are most likely to seek help for cannabis, and you'll see there that the treatment episodes around cannabis have increased dramatically. We have seen some recent shifts with that, where methamphetamine is becoming more of a common substance that people are seeking treatment for, but it's been predominantly cannabis for a really long time. So I'm going to go into now and just start talking about some of the treatment options. Has there anyone got any questions or comments about sort of the information I've given you about substance use in young people? Anything surprising or something missing? Yep. Yeah. The epidemiological data is weak like that. So if you've even used it once in a year, that's a yes. Yeah. But then when we do other studies where we look at like university students, and it's a problem, because if we surveyed university students, that's not as representative as the national data. So, but the problem is that they have to, because the national data has to survey 42,000 people and they ask really a lot of questions, the level of detail they get is really bad. Yeah, so, and the other issue with that is that the government makes decisions based on that data. So, yeah, it's kind of just, walking around blind, poking at things. But it's kind of an indicator. So it's an indicator of where we're at with a drug problem or drug issue. Yeah? It's pretty low. Yeah, most of them are probably, they have got some youth-specific services, but yeah, like their outpatient services, less than 20%, which is remarkable when you think they're the biggest users. So there's still a massive gap there with getting help to those people, or them really realising they need it in the first place. So when we think about treatment, there's a number of broader ways of approaching it. So the first one is the regulatory approach, where we're trying to encourage current users or people who've just started to use to reduce risky patterns of use. Prevention, where we're just trying to delay the onset and the uptake and the surge in substance use. Early intervention, where we try and get people very early, and we try and intervene so that they don't progress to problematic use, and then we get to the dependence end of the spectrum. So if you think about it, it's kind of like on a continuum from absolutely haven't even tried it to severe dependence. So we try and think about where they are on that trajectory and try and think about what level of treatment is required. So if you've never used alcohol, if I put you in a residential treatment setting for alcohol dependence, you'd be a bit, what am I doing here? So it's a bit over the top. So you've got to try and match it to the level of need. That's easier said than done though. So regulatory approaches are a real favourite in Australia. We're renowned for it internationally. So this is where you use law, policies and law enforcement to reduce supply and demand. And Australia has an overall harm minimisation approach to substance use, where it's all about just kind of reducing supply, reducing demand, and it's all about reducing harm. So tobacco is a really good example of a regulatory approach to a substance that's worked. So does anyone here still smoke? Yeah, few. So you may have noticed that the price is going up. It's been going up since 2013. And so what they were doing is they were putting it up 12.5% at a time. Has it gone up since 2016? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. I was thinking I should check that because I'm sure it's gone up again. So how much is a packet of cigarettes these days? Is that a Horizons 40 or is that like just 20? Okay, oh, yeah, okay. So that's a pack. What about a packet of cigarettes, just your standard one? Yeah, yeah. And how many's in a $25 pack? Yeah, so it's about $1 a ciggy, a bit more. Yeah, so people don't like to share them anymore because they're quite expensive. You may have noticed, all those non-smokers who go, oh, can I bum a cigarette? No. So it's costing people about $7,000, I should need to prop up that, around $10,000 a year now to smoke, which is an overseas holiday. But we are seeing reductions and it has kind of worked. So we've seen the halving of the rates of daily smoking in the population in the last 15 years. What's the other thing you think they did that have quelled smoking? You think about the regulation, yeah? Oh, yep. You reckon that worked? Yeah. Everyone was like, look at this, Yep. Yeah, they've made it impossible to smoke. Yeah. So the big thing was when they took it out of nightclubs and bars. I remember I was in Melbourne when that happened, and the problem was it just meant they all stunk because the cigarette smoke was masking all the bad smells in the clubs. So you just go and you'd be like, it really smells. But but then the good thing is you'd go home and you wouldn't smell. So it was, and I think people were saying things like, my hangover's not as bad. And I think it's because the air quality improved. And it was particularly bad in Melbourne because in the middle of winter, they put these little string-off areas outside the club. We looked like it was like a pretend doggy park, and they'd all be out there smoking. So it kind of, it went from it being the cool thing to being a bit of a social leper, which I think had a remarkable impact, plus the cost. So, and the people that are still smoking, they're troopers, but the evidence indicates that the people that are still smoking, and this is not about you guys, are those that have got from low SES, high levels of disability and mental health problems. So the issue is, and of course prisoners, and our clients, drug and alcohol clients. The problem is that the people that are still smoking are the most disadvantaged. So if you keep putting the price up, that really hurts them, you know, and if that was going to work, it would have worked at the first time they did it. So at the moment, we're trying to look at different ways of targeting smoking at those more at-risk groups. So some of the media campaigns have changed attitudes, like every cigarette's doing you damage, banning sponsorship, the price. Yeah, so I think it's been a really multi-factored approach that's really worked well. Yeah. Is that really going to help? Is that what you said? Yeah, I think the people that are still smoking are pretty immune to that. Yeah, so it's just, I think it's about sort of directly targeting those people. And I mean, so you can't stop people from doing something. You know, who's been to Europe lately? Like, everyone's smoking this. You know, you go to a cafe and you're like this close to the next table and they're all smoking away and you're just like trying to eat here. No one cares. Yeah.
When you look at discretionary income, to pay $50 for a couch, wide open,
Yeah.
that's like third of their budget.
Oh, absolutely. They can't afford it, but you know, a lot of them will say it's their only joy. Yeah. It's something that they like to do. And that's the thing, like we can't stop, people are going to do stuff, and I think for me, I think regulation is helpful and it's beneficial, but you know, you also need to work with individuals. So on a mass population scale, very effective, but yeah, people are going to still keep doing it. So another example is the Alcopops tax. So that was, this is pretty old now, so do you guys even know what an Alcopop is? Yeah, okay, good. So that was those mixed drinks that came out, I don't remember when, years ago, and then the problem was young people were just drinking them and getting really drunk. And so this was the first kind of response that had to, you know, alcohol-related violence was we need to tax it, because they're the government and tax is the answer to everything. But it didn't really work because young people aren't dumb, so they just went, we'll just buy the 750ml bottle, we'll mix it ourselves, ta-da! And so it didn't really do much. But there's a lot of debate around, do we want to have a minimum price for alcohol? And that keeps coming up and then keeps going away, and we'll have to keep an eye on that. Because it's actually got a lot of practical issues. Like the wine industry is very upset about that idea because the cost of wine varies quite broadly according to the quality. So if they had a minimum price for a standard unit, then it's likely to push prices up, which is what they're going to do. You know, that's the whole point of taxation. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. The big thing most relevant to you guys is the Safe Night precincts here in Queensland. So now we have 15 of them across Queensland, and this was all about tackling alcohol-fueled violence. And there's a lot of good elements to it. So they've increased the visibility of policing. The guys that look after the taxi queues are fabulous. They were like really dangerous places for a while. The rest and recovery space services that are out there are really doing a great job. There's greater coordination between services and there's more transport, because the problem with the taxi queues was there wasn't enough of them. Now we've got Ubers and they're doing public transport later. The one-punch laws that came in is a strange example of a policy. That's, you know, I guess it's getting the message out there that if you just throw one punch, then you're in trouble. So that may have worked. We don't really know. And the reduced liquor licensing, so the 3 a.m. lockout, the 12 a.m. shop ban, and they were going to roll out more restrictions, but they stopped that because the evaluation that some of my colleagues involved in showed that what they'd done was enough. They didn't need to do it, so they put the brakes on it now. So, because the problem is that it was killing the venues. So then without the venues, the economy suffers and the government's not happy. So it's kind of about trying to keep everyone happy. So we'll see what the evaluations show. So this is just a map of the Brisbane precinct. Sometimes there's up to 30,000 people in there on a weekend. If you think about it, particularly around Fortitude Valley, it's a very small space. So if everyone's you can feel the tension in the air sometimes, and everyone's drunk. So it is a recipe for things happening, but I think the level of support there has really done a lot to reduce that risk. So, do you guys have any thoughts on what we need to do about safe night precincts? Yeah?
Well, I guess like for Melbourne, it's probably a better model than Sydney, considering we have like 24-hour periods.
Yeah. Yeah. I lived in Melbourne when they tried to bring in lockout laws. It was a disaster because everyone just got out in the streets at once and there were fights. And the thing about Melbourne is that it doesn't have the concentration in venues and population that we have. Like in Melbourne, you'll go out in your area. No one goes in the city on a Saturday night. And they'll either go to Fitzroy or St Kilda or Chapel Street, you know, and the numbers of people are much lower because it's more dispersed. Whereas Sydney, when they brought in the lockout laws, King's Cross is just dead now. There's nothing there. It's back to how it was before it picked up. So it hasn't really done a good job there. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I think, you know, and that used to be the culture. It was much more obvious. You know, people used to go out and have a fight on a Saturday night after a few drinks. That was part of the night. So it has changed a lot, but I still think we're along the way there. Yep.
Over 40 years, the culture changed back and forth. Brisbane never used to be quite so concentrated as it is now.
Yeah.
And so when they started, when they extended the drinks to about 5 o'clock in the morning, that's when a lot of that stuff happened. Because people would, early, you'd be knocked off, would go home and go to a party or something like that, and disperse.
Yeah.
They get completely shocked when you get out of the pub at 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I just don't think the answer is like kicking everyone out all at once. Like, yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, you know, and I guess what the latest stuff is kind of indicating is that there's actually just troublemakers, you know, and like so most 95% of young people who are out aren't going to get in a fight, aren't going to cause trouble, you know. And for me, I just think it's just kind of punishing everyone, and I think there's a role for that, but I don't think that should be the only solution, which is why some of the street service support people that I'm going to talk in a little bit, I think are doing a fantastic job. So the other one is health policy. And so there are big epidemiological studies that say, have you used alcohol in the last year? Yes, no, to tell us whether that's a big problem or not. A lot of this is based on that. So the NHMRC is our National Health and Medical Research Council. They come up with our health guidelines. And so the guidelines in adults, and I'm sure you guys know this, is that to reduce risk of lifetime alcohol-related disease or injury to 1 in 100, so you've got 1 in 100 chance of having an alcohol-related disease or injury, you have to drink 2 or less drinks on any one day. So, if you go over that, you've got a 1 in 100, more than 1 in 100 chance of having some kind of alcohol-related problem in your lifetime, which means your entire lifespan. And to reduce your risk of injury on any single occasion, you have to have less than 4 drinks. So if you have 4 or more, it doubles your risk of injury in the next 6 hours. And you can see that on this graph. So if I've had 2 chance, if I fall over when I'm not drunk, so it doesn't work for me. I'm just clumsy. But, you know, so the moment you kind of go 4 drinks, you can see, you know, 10 drinks, you've got 7 times the risk of injuring yourself on a night out. So there is so that's pretty good evidence that on a sliding scale, the drunker you are, the more likely we are to be injured. And injured means being punched, it means being severely intoxicated and just falling over or getting hit by a car. So it's very broad, so that is pretty good evidence. But the problem is they keep reducing this. So it used to be 5, now it's 4. There never used to be a 2 for a lifetime. So if you're under 18, no drinking at all allowed, which is no surprise. But what do you guys think of that? Is that convincing? Would that convince you to stop having more than 4 drinks on an occasion? Yes? No. I pretty much knew you were going to say that. Yeah. 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 A lot of it, and you have to be careful though, because you've got to think about how much sleep you've had and how much you've had to eat and drink. Water, not alcohol. Because that can have a real impact on how intoxicated you become. But yeah, I think it's about your own awareness about how many are too many for you. As you get older, it will decrease. This happens. But you know, we talk to people that have had 20 drinks, and we've done a few breathalyzer studies, and I never forget I breathalyzed these 2 identical twins. They both blew 1.5, which is severely intoxicated. And they're like, oh, we're sober, we're fine. We've been drinking all afternoon. And we were just like, Yes, I'm going to call you Snoop. Yes, Snoop?
Yeah, I'm kind of skeptical like that because maybe normally have about drinks and I've probably done that since a while.
Yeah. Yeah, oh well, that's, you know, 1 broken ankle's not too bad. But I think it's just be aware of your own limits and try to keep count is the main, you know, because we try and use this information with young people, their eyes roll over and glaze over and they don't listen to us. So it's about trying to think about where, you know, what are you aiming for? Like when you're going out, are you wanting to drink to get drunk? And if you are, what is drunk? And what's drunk enough? And the other thing is that people often don't know how to get drunk and stay drunk, and we teach people how to do that. Because the problem with people will go out drinking and they'll have like 3 to 5 drinks per hour in the first couple of hours, and then they're like, I don't want to sober up because you spent so much money, I get it. But then it's like, well, you don't actually have to keep drinking 3 to 5 drinks every hour after that to stay drunk because you're already intoxicated. So it's about titrating how many drinks you're having. Because if you keep having 3 to 5 drinks an hour, you can end up passed out in the gutter. You do that for more than a couple of hours. So it's just about knowing your limits and how to maintain whatever level of drunkenness you're after. You just want to get a bit tipsy or a bit silly, you know, that's different than getting drunk. So I'll go into that a bit more later. Yeah, so under 18, not allowed to drink. Let's say if you're under 15, you're at greatest risk of harm because in adolescence, your brain kind of prunes, become more efficient. And that can get slowed down if you take a lot of alcohol and drugs in your early teens, which has big implications for your brain later. We don't know whether it fixes itself. We're still trying to find out, but the early evidence isn't good. Yeah, so just don't drink. The other thing is that standard drinks differ in different countries. So this is an Australian standard drinks chart. So where's champagne? So you'll see champagne is 170 mils, but that's 1.5 drinks. And a lot of people think that a glass of champagne is 1 drink. It's not. We've had a few friends lose their licence because of that. And, you know, and 1 small serve of wine is 100 mil. But if you go to a restaurant, it's more like 80 mil. You've got to be careful about the amount that's in your glass. Because, you know, a lot of people go, oh yeah, that's a standard drink, but it's not, it's nearly 2. So, yeah, be careful. Yeah?
Just going back to that about under 18 and drinking, how strict it is in Australia.
Yeah.
European drinking culture is much less problematic in my England there, and often children drink, but it's very much of an into the mouth and with a meal and a sort of function of taste rather than anything to do with inebriation. Is there any feasibility of any kind of policy to move towards that drinking culture, or in Australia, which is so ingrained that as it is better?
That's a really good question. There's been this big study called the APSEL study that's been done in Australia that's been looking at this, because half the people that are running it are European, and they have found that it's not the case, that any supply of any alcohol to a young person, even in that kind of cultural family, it does increase their risk of transitioning to binge drinking faster. That was done in Australia, so I think it's either that, even if you're from that cultural group and you're in the Australian culture, and there's evidence in Europe that that's happening as well, in that there's been this, belief that drinking with your parents when you're young is protective. It's not. So, yeah. And it was funny that the guy that was doing the lecture said that they asked parents if they'd ever supplied their children with alcohol, and they asked the children if they had, and the children were like, yeah, and the parents were like, oh, no, of course not. So parents know they shouldn't, but, yeah. So, yeah, the answer is that we don't really know, but the evidence we have so far is that even giving them a sip early or giving them, buying it for them and that kind of stuff, it's not protective at all. Yeah, because everyone thought the same thing. But yeah, the evidence isn't there. It's called the APSEL study if you want to have a look at it. APSAL. So standard drinks. So even in Australia, what you think is standard may not be. Beers are easier, particularly if they're in a bottle, because you can see on the side how many drinks are in it. It's just wine's pretty hard to monitor. But the thing is, just have a look and see what's in it, particularly if you're going to drive. But even if you're not driving, if every drink you have is like 2 drinks, think that's like 2 drinks, not that's 1. Particularly if you're not wanting to get too drunk or you're trying to count your drinks. But you'll see that a standard drink in Australia is 10 grams of alcohol. In the US, it's 8 grams. UK, that's it. I need to get my eyes checked. 14 grams in the US, which is why drinks are a lot stronger there, I've noticed. And Japan, it's almost 20. So I guess it's just being a bit aware of what is considered standard in those countries. It's not universal across the board. And the other thing is that girls can only really drink half of what boys can drink, because our body just does not metabolize alcohol at the same rate as it does in men. So if a male can metabolize 1 standard drink, which is 10 grams of alcohol in 60 minutes, whereas for a girl, it's more like 90 minutes. That's meant to say 1 there. So it takes us an hour and a half to metabolize a drink. It takes boys an hour. So just be mindful of that. That's why they can drink more than we can. So we're going to do a little quiz now, and then we'll have a break. So this is an alcohol use disorders identification test. It's a World Health Organization screening test for problematic drinking. So what we're going to do is I want you guys to write on a page or on a computer. Does anyone write on paper anymore? 1 to 10 somehow, using some device. And then answer each of the questions. So how often do you have a drink containing alcohol? If it's never, put 0. If it's 4 or more times a week, put 4. You get it? Don't lie. No one's going to see your response. Has everyone done the first 2? No? It's always a good, you can tell, you hear screams. Okay. One occasion is like a night out. Can I go? I'll put 5 and 6 back. Are you done? Should be in your notes anyway, but. And these are the last 2. just be careful with these ones because it's 0, 2, 4. So add it up, and then we'll have a 10-minute break and I'll tell you the answer, so you have to come back. So if we're back by 10 past 11, quarter past 11, something like that? Yeah? Thank you. Okay, we'll start up so we make sure we get out of here on time. So has everyone scored their audit? So you score it up and you just get a total score. And this is the interpretation. So if you're a woman and you're scoring 6 or above, or you're a man and you're scoring 7 or above, it means you're meeting criteria for hazardous or harmful alcohol use. It's pretty easy to score above that. So, and those cut-offs have been developed internationally against diagnostic criteria for substance dependence. So they're really good cut-offs, and it's been replicated over and over again internationally. So no one has to tell us what you got, but I guess if you find you are scoring there above that, if you're close, not too bad, but if you're really high, have a think about your drinking. And it's free to use, so you could actually try and change your drinking and redo it and see what happens. But you never know. But anyway, anyone got any comments about these cut-offs? Like, do you think we're just making them up and we're just saying everyone's got a problem no matter what? A lot of people say that. Yeah?
I just kind of think that, like, when it's sort of low and easy to score above it, is
Yeah.
it basically just like alcohol is bad? Like, just don't bring it all.
No, it's not saying that, because you know, if you look at the questions, so it's how often do you have a drink? So if you're having 4 or more times a drink, then you're already at 4, which, you know, if people are having, you know, 1 or 2 glasses a night, that's pretty easy. And then so if you're having 1 or 2 glasses a night, so you got a 4, then you're having 1 or 2, you got a 0, so you're 4 there. You never have 6 or more, still at 0. And then it gets into some of the complications. So you can still drink 4 times a week, but as long as you don't have more than 1 or 2, you're below. But I guess it just, for young people in particular, you know, it's pretty easy to start getting up, you know, around 5 or 6. I remember being able to drink 6 and being fine the next day. I can't do that anymore. So it does decrease with age. But yeah, so if you're going out twice a week and you're having 10 or more each time, you're already at 7, yeah. So it's pretty easy to get up there. But then it sort of gets into, this is sort of old criteria for binge drinking, it's now 4, was 6. And this is more about getting into, so these are signs of a problem, so not being able to stop once you start. Failing to do what was normally expected with you, that means not getting up for uni, not going to work, missing something you wanted to do, needing a drink first thing in the morning after a heavy drinking session, that's a pretty obvious one. That's a sign that you should be a little concerned. Feeling guilt or remorse after drinking. I think a lot of people feel that, particularly if they've done something socially embarrassing, or gotten in an argument with someone or upset someone. Being unable to remember. Blackouts are very common if you have more than 6 drinks. So that's getting home, not remembering how you got home, waking up somewhere you didn't expect to wake up, that kind of stuff. Being injured takes you up really quickly. And someone expressing concern. So it is pretty easy to get up there, but there are genuine questions about things that would be signs of a problem, is what I'm saying. And obviously the more you drink, the more frequently you drink, the more you drink, the higher it gets. So just take it on board and do with it what you will. I'm just telling you what the evidence says. So basically we talked a lot about alcohol, and this is just a bit of a summary of some of the approaches that have been used. So, and the highlighted bits are the ones that have actually got evidence that they work. So we talked about taxation and price regulation, regulating marketing. So taking, I saw there was a story in the news this morning about taking alcohol advertising out of sport. I'd have thought they'd already done that, but now they've got it on their jerseys. So it's not on the signs, there's no TV ads, but you know, they'll have Forex. There's a picture of footballers outside the Forex factory, isn't there? And the problem with that is that we'll have no sponsorship, so we'll see how that goes. The other big thing where regulating marketing, I think, is about to hit is gambling. Have you guys noticed all the gambling ads on TV? Yeah, it's a lot. They're getting away with it. It's really interesting. But anyway, so in terms of the opening hours legislation, like the Safe Night Precinct stuff, pulling the hours back, they reckon there's evidence that's working in terms of reducing a number of assaults. Obviously, drink driving. Australian is renowned for our drink driving work. We led the world with that, and we've really quelled deaths due to drink driving. Drug driving, we're doing all right. And then the next thing is brief interventions and treatment, which I'm going to talk a lot more about now. Alcohol and drug school education. Did any of you guys meet Harold the giraffe? Yeah, no evidence whatsoever for Harold. He's very cute, he's adorable, but no one really thinks it works. If anything, it can actually increase interest in drug and alcohol. But he's so cute. I never met him, I'm upset. So I've seen a picture though. So if we go into some of the more different approaches to drug and alcohol treatment, prevention is, you know, obvious what we're trying to do there. We're trying to stop them from using in the first place. And there's 2 ways of doing prevention. There's a universal approach, where we target everyone, and then there's like a bit more of a risk-targeted approach. So I'm talking about the universal approach first. So these are things like school-based education. So people go into schools and they give them information about drugs are bad, why drugs are bad, all that sort of stuff. But there's not much evidence for it, like I just said, and that fails. And what this is an online cartoon-based school-based prevention program. So they've got one for substance use, which targets alcohol and cannabis, and there's a module on mental health as well, which is relatively new. And the idea is kind of like an episode of Neighbours. So, yep. Grade 9s we did it with. So we go into schools. So we did this big national study over the last 5 years. So we went into 26 Queensland schools, and you can see the other numbers there. So 73 nationally. So 7,000 Year 9 students were involved. And what we did is they get in their PE class, they work through a series of sessions where these cartoon characters, you know, these two are a couple, she likes him, you know, it's just a little teenage drama, but it's quite engaging for young people, and they get into cannabis and alcohol and things happen. And in this study what we did is we did the substance use modules in Year 9 and the mental health ones in Year 10, just because there was so much. So what we did is we compared 4 groups. So there was either, we targeted mental health and substance use, and the idea there was just, can we prevent the onset of mental health, i.e. depression and anxiety, as well as cannabis and alcohol? Or if we target mental health alone or substance use alone, what happens? Or we just had a control group, which is the normal PE program at the school. So they're the groups there. And we haven't got the results of that trial yet, so these are the original substance use trials, but you can see there that, can't really see climate. So this is our intervention. So this is the average drinking, average weekly drinking. You can see that our intervention was much more effective than just the school control condition, particularly at 6 and 12 months. So what that's saying is that we reduced the amount they were drinking. And we also got the same result for cannabis, that we found that the intervention was much more effective for reducing the uptake and trajectory of cannabis use into weekly use. And they also found that the intervention reduced psychological distress, which is why then they started looking at mental health. Yep. No, this is the whole group, so the whole grade. They basically... So I couldn't hear that. It's pretty low, 0.05. I mean, because they're so young, we've got really low levels of initial use. So this is like Year 9. This might be Year 10, maybe Year 11. Yeah, so you would expect it to go up. And, you know, we try and, what we do, they're called cluster randomised controlled trials, so the school either gets it or they don't, to avoid contamination between them. So sometimes you do get these differences, but they're not significant. Yeah. Yeah, so basically we've got some good initial evidence there that that kind of school-based, cartoon-based kind of working through a cartoon and doing some exercises in class after that does actually reduce the amount of weekly alcohol, cannabis, and we did find a marking there for a reduction in psychological stress. So this big study, we're currently analysing the data to see what happened. We have some initial data showing that mental health group worked really well, but we're still looking at the other ones. And now we're following them up to 25 to see what happens over time. So I guess if we can find that we can delay the onset of alcohol or cannabis or prevent people developing anxiety, depression, that's really powerful. But the whole thing is, can we maintain it? So the next level of intervention is early intervention, and this is where we kind of target people who we think are at risk of developing problematic substance use. So the first one's all about delaying onset for everyone, but this is more about going, well, who's more at risk? And the evidence tells us that people who start before age 14 are more at risk than people who start later. Disengaged use, so these are young people who don't go to school or aren't living with their families, or there's some kind of something going on in their life that's made them disengaged from the community. People who've had an injury or illness because of alcohol or drug use, or people who've got a really strong family history of alcohol or drug dependence. So various studies have targeted these at-risk groups in various ways. And one way that we found that people are doing that now is through web and mobile technology. So there's quite a few alcohol interventions in particular out there, and the reason that they're going online is basically it's much easier to reach people online than it is trying to get someone to come in, particularly if they're very, they're not actually, if they don't actually have an alcohol or drug problem yet. It's pretty hard to convince them to come in and talk to you about that. So we find if we go online via an app or the web, then we're much more likely to reach them. We've been doing a lot of telehealth stuff, so we'll recruit people and then we phone them and talk to them and then engage them on a website or do a brief intervention with them over the phone. And the advantage of it is that we can get them, they may or may not engage, and plus we're also delivering a treatment in their natural environment, which means it's much more likely to generalise than them coming into a clinic, having a treatment and then going home and having to think about how they might apply it in that environment. So this is an example of an app that we developed probably a couple of years ago now, and the whole idea of it was to target probably 16, 17-year-olds around trying to promote safer drinking practices, so promoting them to drink in a less harmful way and teaching them some way to control their drinking if they do, and just basically increase their awareness of their drinking limits. So we did this, we got a group of young people together and got a whole bunch of ideas about, we sort of basically said to them, what would you say to your younger self that would stop you from, we sort of talked about the good things about alcohol, the not so good things about alcohol, and kind of learning that lesson about how much is too much and how do we do that, and how often do people kind of wake up the next day saying, I'm never doing that again, I feel terrible, but then they do it again 2 weeks later. So, how could we speed that process up where they start saying that to themselves and they actually then just cut back a little bit so they don't do as much damage. So they came up with this idea and we gave them some apps to play with and they hated all of them except for this drinking game that was a monkey. So we decided that we'd have a character and we came up with a red panda just because no one knows what a red panda is and they're kind of cute. His name was Randy originally, but you weren't allowed to call him that. We got in trouble with the board. They're like, Americans are called Randy. And they're like, no, yeah, okay. So the idea of it is you take Ray out on a night out, so he's your friend, you're going out, and then you kind of make a decision about whether you're having a pretty chilled night, maybe watch some TV, or just sitting around talking, or maybe some dinner. You have a bit of a fun night, or it's just going to be a really big party night. And then you're asked to set a number of drinks that you might you're aiming to drink, you and Ray are going to drink together. And you get some feedback on that. The maximum's 20, just because we had to be sensible about it. People wanted much higher, but we're like, no, 20 is a lot. So, and then, Ray basically gives you some feedback about how many drinks that is and how small he is and why you can't drink that. You also say how long you're going out for, because where he's getting the 6 hours from. And then you're in this nightclub scene, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of animals there. It's a beautiful view. And basically, and you can buy him food, you can buy him drinks, there's cocktails and there's beer and there's water. You can dance and you kind of set an amount you're going to spend, so you've got a bit of a piggy bank there. And so you just kind of buy, the first time people use it, they buy Ray a whole bunch of drinks, there's no surprise there. And basically the idea of it was, the young people came up with this concept of the stupid line. So they're going, well, if we could think about if we start talking about how do you know you're at your limit and what are you trying to achieve on a night out? And they all kind of agreed that there was a point at the night where they knew they should probably stop and they didn't. And then we said, well, what does that look like? And they said, well, you spill your drink, you're kind of swaying with your drink, you start slurring, your eyes start shutting. They all had their own little signs of things they do. And so it seemed to be that socially embarrassing themselves was the key thing that they didn't like, but also the physical stuff. They didn't want to appear drunk. So they wanted to be drunk, but not appear drunk kind of thing. And so they came up with this concept of stupid lines. So that's a line that if you cross, a good night out starts to turn bad. So it doesn't mean they're stupid, it just means, I guess it means going over it is stupid, but we weren't saying they're stupid. They came up with it. That makes sense. So you take Ray out. He likes to dance. that's him flirting. The more, so you kind of select what you're going to do here, and the more drinks he has, the crazier his dancing gets, and his flirting gets really bad. So there's kind of physical signs of drunkenness the more he consumes. There's also some trivia in there, so this is to try and increase their knowledge in an interactive way. So and these just pop up randomly, and then you get told if your answer is right or wrong. And then inevitably people give him, so this is, he's kind of had a few drinks. Here he's quite intoxicated. When they turn red, he's pretty drunk. And then, and he warns you, he says, don't buy me another one. And then they do, and then he throws up and passes out. And then people are given feedback on what they did, and they're asked to guess where they think his stupid line was. So the line moves. And the idea of that was that they were saying that their limit kind of changes according to what kind of day they've had, whether they've drunk the day before, how much sleep they've had, if they've eaten. So they wanted that flexibility about the line being changeable. So saying some nights it's 6 drinks, some nights it's 12. It just depends on how they're feeling before they do it. So, and they get to guess, and then they're told what it actually was. The whole point of the game is trying to guess what his limit was. And it's pretty obvious if you think about it, but it's just about trying to engage them to think about what their drinking limits are, increase their knowledge, and get them to sort of think about where their line might be in reflection. So we did a trial with 197 young people between 16 and 25 to see if this worked. They were asked to participate if they'd used alcohol in the last month. So people either got the app immediately or they got it a month later. And we were looking at whether it increased knowledge and it had an impact on alcohol use and safety behaviours. And what we found, that we did get an increase in knowledge, so using the app increased their alcohol knowledge, but we didn't really get much of a difference in the amount people were drinking between that 0 and 1 month point. And we think that's probably because that wasn't long enough. But it's hard to do a trial like that and keep people engaged, because by the time you go, here's your app, they're like, bored, we're not interested in it anymore. So you've got to try and get the timing right. And we've also known that if we got you to do an audit like we did today, that has an impact on your drinking. Even though it's a tiny, tiny little thing, you go, hey, I got 20 on the audit and 7's bad. That's 3 times. Even those little tiny interventions do have an impact. And I had a lot of assessment in this trial. But what we found is that both groups, once they both had the app, did get reductions in the amount of alcohol they were drinking and severity of the number of drinks they were having. And young people sort of said they liked the app. It made them think about their drinking. It helped them identify the stupid line, and it gave them some good tips for how to drink more safely. We didn't ask them to stop drinking. We were just like, hey, try this app. It's about alcohol. And you're taking this little character out and to have a good night. So that's a really light intervention. So it's almost unclear what we're trying to achieve there, maybe a little too unclear, but it's sort of like a really brief, limited, quite simple app-based intervention. So we wouldn't expect that to have a big impact, which is exactly what we found. It did something. And I guess the idea of things like apps is that the whole population can access them. So even if you get a really simple, little tiny effect, that can have a big impact population-wide. So that's a good example of a kind of a really brief, super simple intervention that actually can do some good. And so brief interventions sort of range from something quite tiny like an app like that to up to 2 sessions of face-to-face sort of treatment with a therapist. But people will do a lot in 5 minutes. You'd have a 5-minute conversation with you about your alcohol use. You can do a lot. So it can go from 5 minutes to 2 hours. And pretty much brief interventions are pretty standard intervention across the drug and alcohol field, mainly because people will only come in a few times. If we can get them to treatment, it's pretty hard to keep them there. So we try and do as much as we can while they're there. And those interventions usually consist of just a brief assessment like the audit, some feedback on it like I gave you, and then maybe some information about, how you can cut your drinking down, how you might drink more safely, so some harm minimisation strategies like having a water between drinks, making sure you eat, that kind of thing. And then there's this approach called motivational interviewing. So I guess just try and think about this from your own perspective. Think of a behaviour you've been wanting to change for quite some time. So one of those things there. And think about, and probably something you've tried to change a few times, and think about how hard that is, particularly with something you like. So that's the kind of thing that people who are using drugs are up against, is that they come in and they're like, oh, I think I have a problem, but not really sure. And then they come in and they're very ambivalent. So even though they're in there and they're speaking to you and they're right in front of your face, they're still ambivalent about whether they can or want to make a change. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that ambivalence is the key dilemma that we all face when we're trying to change any behaviour. So if you might go, right, on Monday, no more chocolate. Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock, you have your chocolate. Oops. Maybe tomorrow, it's that process where it's very hard to change behaviour. And so motivational interviewing is an approach that works with that ambivalence. And these are just some examples of ambivalent statements. It's just that I'm not sure, do I want to? I'm not sure I could, not sure I can. And there's basically 3 dimensions to motivation. So it's that kind of readiness to make a change, how important it is for you to make that change, and how confident you are to make that change. And for you to actually change a behaviour, like, eating chocolate or increasing more, you kind of need a bit of all those things to actually do it, to keep yourself motivated to achieve that. And if you think about any type of behaviour you try to change, you realise that is not easy. So if you throw in a drug that you love, that you really used to enjoy, that you think makes you feel good and it takes all your worries away, that's a pretty hard thing to change. And it's pretty hard to get the readiness, importance and confidence there to change something like that. And that's what we're trying to do. And so motivation interviewing is a collaborative conversational style about strengthening people's commitments to their readiness, the importance and their confidence they can make a change. And if we can get that, then we try and get them to commit to make a change, and we try and figure them out how they're going to do that. So it's developed initially for alcohol use, but it's now used for a whole range of different drugs of people misuse, as well as exercise, diet interventions, all sorts of things. It sounds simple, but it's not. I'm not going to go into this. But there's a spirit of motivational interviewing, which is at the core of it. So you're collaborative, you're evocative, you're trying to encourage the person to be autonomous in their change attempt, and you have to be very compassionate with them. And it's not about confronting and telling them they shouldn't, telling them why they shouldn't with education, or telling them what to do. So it's a conversation, and it's collaborative. And it's about tipping that motivation towards change and trying to keep them there, commit to it, and then make that attempt. So people have to be empathic, of course, because if you're not empathic, no one will talk to you. But it's also developing discrepancy between how things are and how they want them to be, and trying to pull this all together with people and just increase their confidence to make that positive change. And when we look at this approach in young people in particular, and those with alcohol, tobacco and other drug use, we do find that it's pretty effective. So these are effect sizes. So effect size of about 0.2 is small. So we still, so even the app we had that I reckon would have the effects, I do know the effect size at some point, it's probably 0.05 or something. Here it's a bit stronger. So we get kind of better results because we're doing more. But we find that they don't sustain. So we can get good effects till about initially, and then it's 6 months, but then over 6 months later the effect drops off because it's such a small intervention, and people's commitment and their confidence starts to wane if they go back to that behaviour. And we also don't know whether people need assessment feedback and information, or motivation interviewing, or both. No idea. And there was a recent Cochrane review, and Cochrane reviews are internationally an international group that pulls together evidence from randomised controlled trials and does a meta-analysis looking at does it work or doesn't it, and they found it really doesn't work in young people, that they're really, if anything, there's very small short-term effects. So we've got a long way to go with this. So there's a lot of evidence out there that it did work, but if we pull it all together, didn't work. So it's effective, but we only get small effects. We don't know which bits work, and there's a lot of scope to increase the impact of these interventions. And that's basically what I've been doing for the last 10 years. So the first trial we did was we looked at whether adding coping skills to motivational interviewing increased its effects. So basically giving them ideas and strategies for managing whatever their substance use was about. So if they were using it because they were anxious or depressed, we gave them other ways to manage that didn't involve drugs, that kind of thing. And we did that with 61 young people at a Headspace in Melbourne. And we compared motivation interviewing with the coping skills training just versus just assessment feedback and information. And we found that over 6 months, we did get reductions in alcohol, cannabis, and their level of psychological distress. But effect sizes were a bit bigger than 0.17. And so we didn't get a 6-month effect, but you'll see that they're around the 0.4, 0.5. So we've got some improvement. So we're like, okay, maybe that is helpful, adding that to it. And then we were sort of going, well, what else could we do to make this stronger? And if we target the risk factors underlying substance use, will that make it even more effective? Which was the next study that we've done. And I guess, the problem with targeting risk factors, if you think about substance use, there's so many risk factors for substance use. I'm not going to go through them, but you can see them all there. And it's like, well, which one do you pick? And every study finds a different combination is the best predictor. So it's pretty hard to get consistency there. And if you think it's all within this massive framework of the individual's life where you've got the distal risk factors and the proximal risk factors and substance use and level of harm's right in the middle. So there's so many variables that influence whether you use drugs on any day. It's all about, a lot of it's about context and who you're with. Which bit do you target? And we went for personality, and the reason we went for personality is that it's one of the vulnerability factors that's been most consistently linked with substance use across the board, and alcohol use in particular. And there's pretty good evidence that people who are more neurotic, so these are people who are more anxiety and depression prone, are more likely to use alcohol and drugs because they're trying to reduce negative affect and feel better. And that people that are a bit more impulsive, so that means people who are either reward seeking or looking for fun all the time, or just impulsive, so they're into everything and everything, they don't have any breaks, so just do everything and it's all about the thrill. Both of those groups of people are more likely to use drugs. And so we thought, well, if we target the coping skills training towards these personality factors, so we're targeting the risk factor underlying their substance use, does that make it even more effective? So the ones we targeted, anxiety sensitivity. So that's people with a real fear of just feeling anxious, so the bodily symptoms of anxiety. They'll embarrass themselves because people will know they're anxious, that kind of thing. And that's been strongly linked to alcohol use in young people, because obviously anxiolytic effects of alcohol makes them feel calmer. Depression prone, pretty obvious, people who feel a bit sad and depressed or hopeless and helpless. That's been quite strongly linked to drinking alone and moving from alcohol use into more severe drug use, kind of more in a dealing with negative affect, trying to make themselves feel a better way. The sensation seekers, these are the guys that are really into binge drinking, so they're never drunk enough or high enough, so they just use more and more and more until basically something else stops them. And then impulsive people, so they can't inhibit reward responses. So they talk about they have no brakes, so they can't stop themselves in it if they want to. And it's always about seeking something exciting or thrilling. So these are the guys that it will be into all drugs, and into lots of criminal behaviour and behavioural problems as children and conduct disorder and things like that. So what we did is we developed a personality targeted intervention. Where we gave them the assessment feedback again, we gave them motivation interviewing, then we gave them this targeted coping skills training. So we recruited 398 people from the Brisbane Safe Night Precinct with Chaplain Watch. So have you seen them? They call them the Purple Ninjas. They walk around in these purple high-vis suits. They're all chaplains of various denominations. Most of them are volunteers. And they walk around the valley in cars and on foot between about 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. on Friday, Saturdays and some Sunday nights. And they've also got this Night Safe Rest and Recovery Centre, which kind of looks like a mini ED, where people basically go and sleep it off, vomit, will get minor first aid done. And this is just a little study we did with them. So 70% of their clients were really drunk, vomiting or stumbling in public, and they needed to be they kind of look for people who look like they might fall over or they're going to get in trouble and look after them. Aggression, violence, very rare, but less rare, anyway, I won't go into that. But most of them have had more than 11 drinks that come into contact with them, so no surprises there. So what we did is we compared the personality intervention with the motivational interviewing intervention, which is the standard one, with an assessment feedback control, and we found that it worked. And we're not really so the personality intervention was more effective than motivational interviewing or assessment feedback. And these are just some of the components of the intervention. So it's kind of like the Ray out. We kind of said to people, you know, what kind of night out were you wanting to have when you went out and you got drunk and you ended up with the chaplains, and, you know, how many, and we started getting to think about how many drinks that they might have on these different types of nights out. And obviously a crazy night, you'd probably drink more than a relaxed chill out night. But the point of it was basically to sort of people to learn that it can vary, because every night, the answer to every night doesn't need to be 20. Which a lot of them hadn't thought about before, and then getting to think about where their stupid line was. And then we worked with them to come up with a good night out plan. So in the first session we talked to them about what kind of harm minimisation strategies they could use to just, count their drinks and sort of think about how many they're going to drink and try and stick to that limit, and what things they can do in between, like getting a glass of water when they get a drink, that kind of stuff. And in the second session, we gave them the personality risk training. So they're just some of the coping strategies. So we kind of matched them to target the underlying risk variable that they had. And just you can see there that most people that we recruited were sensation seekers, which is no surprise given that they were out in the valley having a good night, and there's a lot of alcohol there as well, a lot of them on party drugs as well. So this is just some of the data. So you can see that the effect size got up to 0.71, which is quite high. So what we're seeing there is evidence that what the coping skills training does increase the effectiveness of motivation interviewing and assessment feedback. So, which is a positive result, which is exactly what we were looking for. We've got big reductions in the number of drinks that they drank when they did drink. So we kind of got 50% reductions. In all groups, but particularly the personality intervention had a massive effect. That's just the same data, but showing the number of drinks they had on a drinking day. And we found a massive reduction in alcohol-related problems, which is no surprise given they'd gone out, they'd got injured or something terrible happened, and then 3 months later that hadn't really happened to anywhere near the extent. But we found no difference between the groups either. And the other main point here is that all groups got better, so we saw improvements no matter whether we gave them assessment feedback, like an audit and some feedback. We did motivation interviewing with them for 2 sessions on the phone, or we did 2 sessions on the phone where we gave them assessment feedback, motivation interviewing, and the coping skills training. So no matter what we gave them, they improved, which is a really positive sign. So it kind of shows that if we can get out there, meet young people when something bad's happened, talk to them about their drug and alcohol use, we can get reductions in the amount they're using. And at no point did we tell them they had to stop. We just said, we want to talk to you about it. Whether you stop or not is up to you. We just want to talk to you about what's going on. Because they all agreed the one thing they didn't want to do is repeat the night out they'd had when they met us. Because no one goes out and wants to hang out with the chaplains. It's just not, they don't want to lie in a room vomiting all night, you know. So that was our main engagement strategy, was that's the one thing they just don't want to do again, which is understandable. So basically we're saying early interventions work, but you know, it's about having the ability to deliver them and find the people. And the Safe Night precincts are a good place for that. And we're currently seeing whether this personality intervention, which is called Quick Fix, works in some of our treatment services here in Queensland. We're still recruiting through the Valley, but also on the Gold Coast, through the chill out zone there, which is a kind of caravan on Cavill Avenue, and seeing whether that works. So that sort of wraps up the brief intervention side of things. I'm just going to briefly go through some of the other treatments that are available. So we're moving up the spectrum. So we've gone from prevention to brief intervention, and now we're kind of getting more into the space where people have problematic use and dependence. And so there's a whole range of different options that are out there. And the idea that there's more and more options all the time because they're desperately trying to find a way to engage people. So there's programs out there to take people through detox and withdrawal. There's outreach programs that will come to you. There's day programs where people drop in. There's telephone services. There's residential rehab places. And there's also pharmacotherapies. And I guess the challenge is that people come in when they're at their worst. People don't come in early. And a lot of the services out there do not deliver any of this evidence-based care. They're not doing anything remotely evidence-based, which is a big concern. Only 25% of them do, and I reckon that's an overestimate. And they're not very youth-specific, so they often, the services that are trying to target youth are just doing what they do with adults. So they're not taking the young people's developmental differences with young people into account. So residential rehabs, so these are it's like celebrity, the celebrity rehab shows. It's kind of like that, but there's no celebrities, and it's nowhere near as nice. So people are either in there from 4 weeks to 9 months. They're getting less they're getting briefer in duration, but some people would just go away for 9 months in these settings. And the original model of care was called a therapeutic community, where basically the community, the patients govern. So they kind of have their own rules, and their job is to implement them and oversee them. And if you do something wrong, you get taken into a room and they all talk to you about it. And it's, one of the services I work with, one of their managers went undercover in one of these communities and just said it was terrible. So you're just constantly in trouble because there's so many rules and things you can go wrong. But it's quite powerful in terms of it being peer-led. And so we've just done a big review on these therapeutic community models and haven't found much evidence for them. But we spoke to some people in them that did actually like it because it was the first time they'd ever had any structure or rules in their lives because they had such chaotic lives the entire up to this point that coming into an environment that was structured and predictable and safe was really valuable for them. So it can work for some people. Cognitive behaviour therapy is by far the most evidence-based approach to treatment. No one really gets it in treatment, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure you guys all know what that is. An important component within this space is called relapse prevention. So this occurs when they've been treated and they're about to be discharged. Part of the planning is about looking at what's going to happen when they leave and what the triggers of substance use are and preparing them for that. Particularly if they're in a residential setting, but if they're seeing you as an outpatient, it's really important to start thinking about what you can do to help them alter their environment to reduce those triggers that are around them. This is just some evidence saying it works, young people. So just to finish up, there's a range of evidence-based drug and alcohol treatment approaches that are available across the spectrum, right from prevention to severe end of the spectrum. The evidence for taxation, price and marketing regulation is pretty strong. We've got good evidence that does work. Some of the school-based online prevention programs that we've been involved in developing, there's evidence they're effective in the short term. We're looking at long term. School-based drug education, not so much. Brief motivational interviewing in young adults works, but it has very small effects that don't maintain. So we've been doing some work to try and increase the impact they have. And we're also looking at whether we add booster sessions to maintain effects, whether that helps us keep them. When we get to the more problematic dependent end of the spectrum, we do need to do more than a brief intervention. So we do CBT approaches that combine with motivation interviewing, which usually around 10 sessions. And there is some evidence that works, even with comorbid disorders, but we've got to do a lot more research to show that. The main things I want you to remember is engagement is critical. We really need to find a way to get people into treatment earlier, reduce the stigma around substance use treatment seeking, and we need more evidence. So if you want to donate money to research, happy to take it. So let me know if you have any questions by just sending me an email, and thanks for listening. Thanks for making it when you finish your thesis and everything. Thank you.
Passing, so I thought I'd drop in and see how you went.
Really right. Obviously went over time a bit.
That's okay.
Yeah, I had a few extra slides in, but obviously don't have time for them. Very interactive group. Do I have to do anything? Do I delete that?
You can do
that? Alright. So, you got your pointer? Oh, you were quick. You really thought I was going to take it.
No, I honestly, yeah, I did actually thought you'd steal it. I'd never see it again. I had to go at the people at reception for getting us a dodgy.
What did they say?
They said, oh, it must have been the people before you then, you know. So anyway, I don't know.
It does say remember USB.
Yeah.
I suspect that's kept separately.
Yeah.
How many more of these you got left?
So Matt Sanders is next week, and then one after that is gone. And I'm giving my last lecture tomorrow.
Yay.
Yeah, you're telling me, yeah. Oh.
Alright, I think I've got everything. Bye.
People always leave stuff. No. No, treat Excel as storage of data. Yeah, but we don't refer to call as keep it straightforward.